Okay, we are at Pesahim 57 Nun Zayin, and our plan is to complete the fourth Perek this evening. It's a short daf because the Perek ends, and then there's some commentary introduction to the next Perek afterwards. So we begin Tenora Banan. Barishona hayu notnin pe'ah lalefet ve'la keruv. Beforehand, we were talking about the custom of the people of Jericho, that they would leave pe'ah even for vegetables, even though we saw that the general rule is only something that you preserve for a long time, like grain and grapes, olives. Those are things that are preserved. Those you have to give pe'ah. But according to the Baraita previously, something that is not preserved, you don't have to bring pe'ah. However, the people of Jericho would do some things like turnips because they are pickled, and so they're preserved that way. So we're following up on that tradition and saying at first, some people used to give pe'ah for turnips and cabbages. Those two they pickled, and then that's Tanakama. Rabbi Yosef omer af la kaflot. Rabbi Yosef adds also leeks. Okay, good. That's one baraita. Now we have a second baraita that's a little bit different. But Tanya idach hayu notnin pe'ah la lefet ve la kaflut. According to this, they would give pe'ah for turnips and leeks. So you see that turnips is in both, right? Lefet is in both. But this one has kaflut and leeks. And then Rabbi Shimon omer af la keruv. He adds also cabbages. Okay, so that's the two versions. Now we're going to just analyze these and say, it looks like altogether we have three different opinions, right? Based on, if we put these together, there's a nice chart here. This is our first explanation now. So we have the first Tana that says turnip and cabbage. Rabbi Yosef says also leek, so he has all three. Then the Tana Kama of the second Braita said turnip and leek, and the Bishimon adds cabbage, so we have all three. So altogether, we have three different opinions, either turnip and cabbage, turnip and leek, or all three, which is what Rabbi Yosef and Bishimon agree. Okay, that's our first understanding, but now we're going to reinterpret. I guess we want to minimize the number of, the extent of the machloket and the number of different opinions. So we say, La tere tanei havu, really is only two opinions among both baraitot. V'tana kama de Rabbi Shimon, hainu Rabbi Yosef. The first opinion in the Braita of Rabbi Shimon is actually the same as Rabbi Yosef. And the first opinion in the Braita that mentions Rabbi Yosef is actually the same as Rabbi Shimon. When we say also, we're not adding to both of them, but adding only to the first. In other words, when the first Tana says turnip and cabbage, and then Rabbi Yosef says also leek, he meant turnip and not cabbage, but rather turnip and leek. He wasn't adding a third one, but rather exchanging the second. So therefore, he says not turnip, cabbage, but turnip and leek. And so to the second one, the Tanakh said turnip and leek, and Bishimon says no, take out leek and put in cabbage. And once you do that, altogether you have only two opinions. Turnip and cabbage is the same as Rabbi Shimon, and that this Tanakh turnip and leek is the same as this one, turnip and leek. All right, very good. So that takes care of the topic, the topic of vegetables for pe'ah. And now that we mentioned that, we're going to tell some stories about various important people. Tenora Banan ben Bohayan Natan pe'ah layarak. There was this guy. He was the son of a man named Bohayan, and he gave pe'ah on his vegetable garden, which again seems like a nice, generous thing to do. And maybe this was a practice in pre and non-rabbinic circles, but it's a chumrah that leads to a kula, because in general pe'ah does not require ma'aser. If you're giving it to the poor people, you the owner, the poor people, nobody has to give ma'aser. So that's patur. That's fine. But if you're giving vegetables, pe'ah and vegetables, and they're not really pe'ah, they're not actually designated as pe'ah, then you're giving away food that's tebel. And now these poor people are going to be eating tebel. So that's the problem with this law. So Ben Bohayan did it. His father, who knew this halacha, he came and he saw the poor people that were carrying all these vegetables that they took from the corner of his son's field. And they're standing there at the entrance. Amar lahem banai hashlichu malechem v'ani noten lachem kiflayim b'me'usar. He says, listen, I want to take care of you. So if you put down your vegetables and leave them here, I will give you double the amount of vegetables from produce that I already took maaser. And don't worry, I'm not doing this. I'm not tricking you. I'm not trying to make you give back that which you already took. I'm not being stingy with you, but rather because there's a general halakha that the sages said that we do not give the corner of the field for vegetables. And so what you're having holding in your hand is tebel. And so I don't want you to just say, give it up. I want to give you a compensation for having to give this up now, and I will give you more later. Okay, so that's a very nice thing that Bohayan's father did to help the poor people avoid the prohibition. Now we ask a question on this Baraita about the language. Why do you have to say, not because I'm stingy? Obviously he's not stingy. He's giving them double of what they took before. So you can see that he's very generous. The answer is, he said that because he wanted to make sure that poor people knew he wasn't just putting them off, saying, "Oh, leave it here. I'll give you double later. Oh, don't worry, come back to me." But yet, with that intention. So that's why he said, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to cheat you out of charity that we have that my son has given you. But rather, here's the halakha, and he explained it to them so that they would understand where he was coming from. All right. So now a few more stories about inappropriate taking of things. Tenor Abanan, Barishona hayu manichin orot kadashim b'lishkat bet haparva. So anyone who brings an animal, usually if it's a personal sacrifice, kadashim kalim, then the owner can take the skin back home. But if it's something that's donated to the Bet HaMikdash and kodashim, kodshe kodashim, the skins of the animals are not burnt. You don't burn skin. A bad idea. It doesn't smell very good. Rather, those are donated to the Kohanim. Whoever there are the Kohanim who are serving during that time, they get to keep the skins and use it for themselves. So the original practice was they would take all the orot of the sacrifices and put them in a special chamber in the Bet HaMikdash called the parva chamber. They would gather all day long all the sacrifices there. And then at night, every night, they would distribute them to the clan that was in charge then. All the Kohanim were split up into 24 ma'amadot. So each ma'amad would have about 2 chances a year to go and serve in the Bet HaMikdash. Each ma'amad was split up into 6 families, 6 clans. And so each family would serve in the Bet HaMikdash 1 day of the week. And therefore, if you're serving on Sunday, so you get all the skins of the animals that were offered on Sunday, and so to Monday, and so on. So that way it was distributed fairly. That was the original system. However, it broke down. However, there were these thugs, strongmen, Kohanim, who were bullies, and they would go and just at the time when they were distributing, they would go and take them for themselves, and they wouldn't share them equally with the families that were serving then who deserved them. So they said, this is not a good idea. So they said, you know what? We'll pile up all the skins in this chamber for the whole week. And then Friday afternoon, the whole ma'amad comes, because then they switch from one ma'amad to the other. So now all the 6 families are going to be together. And that way, since we have the whole, all the families together, we can withstand the pressure from these strong men. And that way we will take them and we'll split them at the end of the week from the 6 families. And so that seemed like a good idea, but not good enough. Nevertheless, these prominent priests, Gedolei Kehuna, it's not clear, are they families of Kohanim Gedolim? We'll see in a minute that they could have been, but in any case, they're prominent. They use their influence, their power, either physical strength or their political strength, and nobody would stand up to them, and they would just come in, and they didn't care that it was Friday and all the other families were there. They would come in and just steal the skins. So they came up with a final solution. Amdu ba'alim v'ikdishum l'shamayim. What they did is the owners, either the owner who donated it or the kohanim who belonged to, they made it hekdesh. So that now, no, it belongs to the Bet HaMikdash. Bet HaMikdash can use it or sell it. And that way, no one, if you're not going to share nicely, then nobody can have them. It's interesting that these thugs would, they were okay being thieves and stealing from other people, but if something's hekdesh, they were very pious. As, then we won't take it. So that was the way. That was the way to solve the problem. And so now the skins are worth a lot of money. So what did the Bet HaMikdash use them for? אמרו, לא היו ימים מועטים עד שחיפו את ההיכל כולו בטבלאות של זהב, שהן אמה על אמה כעובי דינר זהב. It wasn't very long that they were able to generate enough money that they got golden tablets, and they used the golden tablets to put all over the hechal, and so now it was all plated with gold. By the way, in the Met Museum right now, on the website, they have an exhibition of a reconstruction of the Bet HaMikdash with all gold inside. It's very beautiful if you want to go check it out. So they were able to adorn the entire hechal with this gold. And then they wanted to show it off when people came. Most people can't see into the hechal, so when it was holiday time and have all the pilgrims there, they would take these plates and pile them up on top of the stairs so that everyone can see and admire them. They could see how perfect the craftsmanship was without flaw, that they were able to beautify the Bet HaMikdash. So out of a difficult situation of these strongmen Kohanim coming and stealing, they were able to get something positive out of it and beautify the Bet HaMikdash in this way. Okay, now this solution for taking care of things that people were stealing by making hekdesh turns out to be important for the people of Jericho too. Tana Abasha Olomer Korot Shel Shikma Hayu Biricho. In Jericho, they had these sycamore trees, right? And remember, we mentioned them in the Mishnah. And we said that the people of Jericho would cut off the branches and use it for themselves, even though the trees were hekdesh. So this seems to be archaeologically true that they had lots of sycamore trees in that place. And why'd they make them hekdesh in the first place? Here's the background story. There was these mafia guys who would come around and they would take all the branches of the trees all the time. And so the owners couldn't defend themselves. So the owners came and they sanctified the trees to the Bet HaMikdash, and that way these thieves, even though they didn't care about Ben Adam Lachavero, but if it's hekdesh, they wouldn't touch them, and that's the way that they protected their trees. Okay, good. And now that we mentioned different thugs, bad guys, we're going to mention a few other families of Kohanim who were not on their best behavior. Alehem ve'al kayoseh behem amar Abba Shaul ben Botnit bishum Abba Yosef ben Hanin oy li mibet baitos oy li me'alatan. And so this Abba Shaul said in the name of Abba Yosef ben Hanin regarding, these are different families of Kohanim that were active during the time of the Bet HaMikdash. And so one of them was the house of Baitos. We see Baitos mentioned a lot of times. They seem to be in charge of the temple rituals. They were like the ritual committee. They knew the traditions and were in charge of making sure everything was followed correctly. But he says, woe woe to us from their house, and woe to us because of their clubs. They would go and beat people up. Allah also could mean curses. Maybe it's that. Oili mebet Hanin, oili melechishatan. The house of Hanin, they would whisper and spread bad rumors about anyone who they didn't like. And so you don't want to be on their bad side. Oili mebet Katros, oili mikul mosan. The house of Katros, they would write nasty letters, write lies about people. And so they, if you're on their bad side, woe is to you. Oy li mi bet Ishmael ben Piachi, oy li me egrofan. And this Ishmael ben Piachi, woe to their fists. They would go and physically beat people up. שהן כהנים גדולים ובניהן גזברים וחתניהם אמרכלים ועבדיהן חובטין את העם במקלות. Look how they are corrupt and they abuse their power. They were a family of the high priests, כהנים גדולים. And, they're supposed to be the great religious leaders, and yet they use their power for self-serving means. They made their sons into the treasurers, their son-in-laws overseers, and their servants would go and hit people to force them towards their will. So you get a small glimpse here of the terrible corruption and misappropriation of power that was going on during the times of the Bet HaMikdash. And talk about reasons why the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed. Right? You can only imagine what kinds of politics and terrible things were happening there. Okay, something extremely interesting about this Bet Katros, which are mentioned here, that they would write down, they would write bad letters of recommendation for people. So it turns out that archaeologists found the burnt house. Have you been in the burnt house? Right, everybody remembers that. And they found in the burnt house stone vessels. Which it's hard to make stone vessels. So you'd only use stone vessels if you really care about Tuman Tahara, because they do not become impure. And so likely that this was a family of Kohanim that lived in the burnt house. And then they found a pretty large, a round stone, 10 centimeters in diameter. It was a weight, a stone, whatever it was used for. And on it was a script that said, Bar Katros. So that's an amazing thing. The burnt house seems to have belonged to this family, Bar Katros, the one who we are mentioning here, that they wrote negative letters about people. Okay, so anyway, their house burned down. So that's any consolation to those who were their victims. But that's an amazing archaeological find. Good. Tenora banan arba sevachot savcha zara rishona. Now talking about other times when, sadly, the Kohanim were corrupt, and so there are 4 times when the temple courtyard cried out. Rishona, the first time, seumikan bet bnei Ali. Shetimmeu hechal Hashem, right? The Bet HaMikdash as a personification, as if cried out and said, "Get out of here!" This is the Mishkan. Said, "Get out of here!" The sons of Eli. Sons of Eli would abuse the woman and steal from people, and so they were very evil, and so they had to be kicked out, which they were, and the Kohuna Gedolah transferred to the house of Sadok after that. One of the guys we mentioned, so this another one. So Yisachar from Barkai, that village of Barkai, shemechabed et asmo mechalel kodshe shamayim, tavakerich yadeh beshirai ve'abed aboda. What did he do so bad, this guy Yisachar ben Ish Kfar Barkai? He would honor himself and he would desecrate sacrifices, because he would wrap his hand in silk, put like a silk glove on. He didn't want to get his hands dirty when he was dealing with the meat and the blood, and so he covered his hand. However, this is prohibited. Whenever you're touching the utensils of the Bet HaMikdash and dealing with the blood, you have to touch it with your hand directly and not have an interposition in between. But he wanted to honor himself and not get his hands dirty, and so he was doing all the Bet HaMikdash service in an improper way. So the Bet HaMikdash said, "Kick him out," and he was kicked out. Okay, now we have 2 more cries, but these are positive. וייכנס ישמעאל בן פיחי תלמידו של פנחס וישמש בכהונה גדולה. So the gates they sang out and said, please enter Yishmael ben Piachi, because he follows in the ways of Pinachas, and he should be Kohen Gadol. Okay, Yishmael ben Piachi was mentioned up here as the house of ben Piachi would beat people up. So it seems like he himself was a righteous person, but his members of his household, his children after him, were evil. Just like Ali was a good guy, but his sons were not. ועוד צווחה זרה, שאו שרים לשכם, וייכנס יוחנן בן נרבי, תלמידו של פנקאי, וימלא כדוסו מקודשי שמיים. Another good person that he should enter is this Yochanan, the son, the student of Pinkai. Pinkai maybe is another nickname for Pinachas. There is some speculation by the Maharsha that this Yochanan was the famous Kohen Gadol during the times of the Chashmonaim. He was the first one to call himself Kohen Gadol. Eventually, he became a Sadducee. He was not a good person, but perhaps at the beginning he was good. Anyway, I don't think there's really a lot of reason to think he was Yochanan, but okay, could be. Okay, what was so good about him? אמרו עליו על יוחנן בן נרבי שהיה אוכל 300 עגלים ושותה 300 כרבי יין ואוכל 40 שאה גוזלות בקינוח סעודה. He was so great. He had amazing largesse. He would eat 300 calves and drink 300 jugs of wine, and for dessert he'd have 40 se'ah of birds. Okay, this doesn't seem like it's very positive, but the explanation cannot be literally that he ate all this, but rather that he shared this with others, with other people, and so therefore he was able to sustain lots of other poor people from what he was in charge of, and so that's what was so great about him. All of his days, there was never any leftover sacrificial meat that you'd have to throw out. You're not supposed to leave any leftover, but you could understand Kohanim who would be stingy would say, oh, I'm going to eat all this myself, and then they got full, they'd have to burn the rest. But he was generous and shared it with all the other Kohanim, and so he's remembered for good, and so he was a good Kohen Gadol. Okay, that was the good guy. Remember Yisachar from Barkai who put his glove on his hand? Whatever happened to him? Says, well, one time the king and the queen were sitting. Maybe it's talking about the Hasmonean king and queen. And Malka amar gadyayaeh. The king said, goats are the best animals. And the queen said, no, sheep are the best animals. And this is what they're fighting about. All right, you have to have a level of luxury to be able to fight about what kind of meat is the best. Anyway, Amru man mochach Kohen Gadol. Who's going to be the arbitrator between us to decide? Let's bring the Kohen Gadol. He's an expert. Every day he's bringing goats and sheep and he's eating them. So he has a careful palate. Let's see what he says. Teka masik korbanot kol yoma. Ataiu. So they bring him in. Achve bideh. And he made a gesture with his hand. He's like a dismissive gesture to the king. He's like, king, you say that goats are better? If goats are better, then they should be sacrificed for the daily offering. But in fact, we bring lambs for the Korban Tamid. And so therefore he sided with the queen against the king. So the king was not happy with that. First of all, they sided with the queen, but probably more that he gave him this short shrift and with the wave of his hand and was not honorable to him. Amar Malka, so the king said, off with his hand. If he's not going to have reverence for me, then I will cut off his right hand. We cut off his right hand, that's it. His career is over. Yahab shochad ufesakeh lismaleh. So as the executioner was cutting off his hand, he bribed him and said, cut off my left hand instead. I need my right hand. So he did. Okay, so now he only lost his left hand. Shema Malka ufsakeh limineh. The king heard that he did that. He said, take off his other hand too. And now, poor guy, he had no hands left. אמר רב יוסף, בריך רחמנא דאשקלי יששכר איש כפר ברקאי, למתרפסה מיני בהי עלמא. Okay, you might feel bad for this guy. On the other hand, Rav Yosef said this was a blessing for him. This guy was so evil, and he got lucky that he received his punishment here in this world, so that he will be done with, and he won't receive such bad punishment in the next world. Okay, so it seems that the rabbis didn't feel too bad for him because of the actions that he did before. And we end, Amar Rav Asher, Yisachar ish kefar barkai, la tena matnitin. This guy who cut off his hands, he not only was corrupt and making all the Kodashim Pesulim, he also was an ignoramus. He didn't know Mishnah. Well, obviously he didn't know Mishnah. He lived before Mishnayot were composed. But the point is he didn't even know the Torah Shebe'al Peh, that were the traditions prior to the Mishnah. Ditnan, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kebasim Kodmin Na'izim Bechol Makom. So because Rabbi Shimon says that lambs are preferable over goats everywhere. And is it because they're better that they're mentioned first in the Torah? Is it because they're better? No. Talmud Omar im kebes yabi korbano melamed shenehen shekulim ke'ehad. It's true. It talks about the lambs first, but then it talks about goats right after. And this teaches us that they are equal. So even though the Torah talks about lamb first, in fact, the Mishnah teaches that they are considered equal status. If he knew his Mishnah, he wouldn't have said the wrong answer. He would have said, you're both right, they're equal. And then he would have been okay. Ravina Amad, afilu mikrana me lakera. Not only did not know Mishnah, he didn't even know basic Torah, first grade Chumash. Tichtiv im kebes im ez, regarding the korban hatat. It says if you bring a kebes, if you bring a ez, you could bring any of these animals. Iba kebes leite, iba ez leite. If you want to bring this one, it's fine. Right? There's no preference to which animal you're going to bring. Whatever you have on hand, whichever one you would like to bring is fine. And so we see that I think the rabbis are connecting people that do evil with people who are Ama'aritz and never studied anything. And so therefore, this is an encouragement to go and study the halachot, and that way, and not only will not mistakes on halacha, but also we won't say the wrong thing when we're in front of a king and a queen. Hadran alach makom shenahagu uslika la Pesach Rishon. So chazakim buruchim for completing the fourth perek, and this also completes the section known as Pesach Rishon, the first four perakim of Masechet Pesachim, and the last one, the 10th one, are all called Pesach Rishon, about Chametz and Masah and all the discussions. The last perek will be about the Seder itself. However, the next perek from 5 to 9 are called by the Geonim Pesach Sheni, because they are all involved with the details of the Korban Pesach itself, and that's what we look forward to beginning tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.